RDW is an agency from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Waterworks in the Netherlands. This ministry is very progressive on bringing automation to the use on roads and everywhere. They really want to have a fast implementation because the promises of having a safer travel, having a cleaner travel, and having a more economic travel are what they want. RDW is an agency and is international, mostly known as a type approval authority for the European type approvals. But this RDW is also the holder of a few basis registers of the Netherlands, meaning that we hold the single registration of cars and their owners and everything that comes along with that. But it's also issuing driving licenses. And because of that last task, RDW is also working very hard to make governmental processes more digital. We have to do that for ourselves, but we also do that for our fellow governance agencies and so on. And this, having the fact that we know a lot about secure data centers because of the registrations we have, knowing a lot about driving licenses that are also identification documents in the Netherlands and in identification thing, let's call it that way. And we are doing type approval and are presenting the Netherlands in Brussels for the European community and in Geneva for the United Nations. So let's say the global community. We have a lot of knowledge in the house. And that gives us the opportunity to help car builders, OEMs, to talk about things where there are no regulations at this moment, like there is on connected cars. There is a lack of regulation on where a connected car should have its rules or its quality assessments or whatever. It's still underway, and until now, it's very much done by car builders themselves. So where we came in as Dutch government and as RDW is trying to move this attention forward by firstly getting into the WP29 in Geneva. That's the international group providing harmonization on international rules. We were initiative takers on having a task force group on having a secure connection, using that secure connection for over-the-air updates, and where over-the-air updates should have their rules and regulation. Hari Ramakrishnan will talk about that later on. The other thing we are doing right now is not really in the area of regulation, but is trying to help out OEMs to talk to them how they provide quality and assurance on security and on the way they build software or buy software by having some kind of an EDP audit at their site. And we can do that because our own data center is EDP audited every year because we are holding a governmental basis registry. So we have to fulfill the highest needs and the highest quality data center. And we use the same framework in talking to OEMs. And we just had a few talks, but one of them I can say that Tesla was the first because RDW is the type approval authority for Tesla for the whole of Europe. And this is not an official thing. That is what we call a learning audit, where governmentals learn what things we should regulate, and where car vendors or car builders learn how they can get into a secure environment on their connected vehicle. So the two main things we will talk about further on in this webinar is the thing we do in the global connection in a task force, where Harry will talk about, and the other thing that Gilles will come upon is not really from RDW, but it's more a thing that started in the Netherlands, and it's about CITS, but Gilles will explain all of that later on. So I think this is what I could introduce about this, especially the fact that we as RDW in the Netherlands have the big luck that we are an approval authority into the regulations of cars, but that we also know about the digital identity, and that we also know about IT in a secure way. And by bringing and merging all these knowledge together, we can play a role in bringing secure connected cars forward.
So thank you, Geert, for this explanation. We will move on to our next speaker, Harisankar Ramakrishnan. Can you show your presentation and start your talk, please?
So I'd like to start my presentation with an overview slide on the work that is being currently done on the task force on cybersecurity and software updates. So what you see on your screen is the high-level view of the work that we are currently doing. As Geert has explained, the task force was set up under the WP29 working group. The WP29 working group is the UN working group which deals with innovative technologies in automotive industry, and we have a number of subgroups under them, including the ITS AD group, which is a platform for discussion on intelligent transport systems and automated driving. The task force on cybersecurity and over-the-air updates was set up as an informal subgroup under the ITS AD group. We started working on this task force on December 2016, and it's been almost a year since we have started some developments on the same. The task force work is supposed to go forward for a couple of more months till March, where we aim to have some solid conclusions regarding our work that we plan to give back to our parent group, and then decide on how to deal with the measures that we have identified. So right now, the current work is in a work in progress mode. So the main aspects that we are dealing in this task force are cybersecurity and over-the-air updates. So in cybersecurity, the task force group started with identifying a threat matrix in which industry players and regulatory authorities and technical services and other interested parties in the automotive industry, we had came up with a list of possible threats that we could foresee, and we had come up with a list of mitigation measures for the same. Once this drafting process had been completed, we set up to have a writing paper, a working paper on the same, in which we aim to have some guidance measures on how to deal with these threats and their mitigation policies. We also reflect the fact that there are some industry norms, industry participation that happens in the form of standardization with respect to cybersecurity. So we aim to develop our regulatory framework in such a way that it is complementary to the work that is currently being developed by the industry. So we have exact identification of threats and mitigation measures that is being done by this task force, and the industry standard on cybersecurity deals with the assessment of these threats and evaluation of these mitigation measures. So we prescribe that the two processes are done hand in hand, so that the input from one process can be taken up as an output to the other process, and we can use the combined result of both these processes for type approval of vehicles in order to have an assurance that the vehicles that are brought to the European market are secure from a cybersecurity point of view. The documents that are that we are working on in this task force is publicly available, and it can be referenced by whoever is interested. So currently we have made a draft document on these threats and mitigation measures. We have defined cybersecurity principles, which are high-level principles which manufacturers are supposed to adhere to, and we have derived mitigation measures from the same, which are more detailed versions of the security principles. However, the idea within the group is to keep it as technology agnostic as possible, because we want to leave the cybersecurity implementation to the manufacturers. So we, as an approval authority, we would be gauging the effectiveness of how the manufacturers have implemented their cybersecurity measures. That is the expected outcome of the work that is being done within the cybersecurity task force. Similarly, we also have another topic in our agenda, which is the software updates. So with respect to software updates, we have the safety aspects, we have the type approval aspects, and we have the security aspects that needs to be considered. The security aspects are already taken care of under the cybersecurity working group. The type approval aspects are the ones that are currently in focus for an approval authority like RDW. We have system type approval regulations which are currently defined for existing automotive systems like braking or steering or lighting. So we aim to have a study, or we aim to have some requirements on how software updates can affect these existing type approval aspects. But we also understand the fact that the concept of software extends way beyond the domain of the existing system approvals that we have. So we aim to have some additional measures in terms of configuration management and in terms of software quality control. So in configuration management, we aim to assure that when software updates are sent to the vehicles, approval authorities have a capability to check what updates are sent to the vehicle and whether the updates that are sent to the vehicle are type approved. So we have an identification number and relevant parameters identified along with it, which can be verified by periodical technical inspections or market surveillance to ensure that what the manufacturer has actually developed is in fact what is there in the vehicle. Similarly, we also during the type approval process, we also aim to have some measures for software quality control. Software quality control extends its scope beyond the mechanical system approvals that we currently have. We are looking at directions in the line of software validation and software verification, and how software engineering principles can be effectively applied to ensure that the software update does not conflict with any safety, privacy, or environmental impacts. So we are currently working on defining these requirements in these domains, and it is expected to have a concrete proposal by the end of March. However, we also realize that there are certain topics that needs much more further study, or much more requirements needs to be brought out. So within this task force, we are also looking for additional aspects. For example, the software validation aspect that I was just talking about, it requires an extensive study and extensive list of requirements that needs to be taken up as a separate study group and processed as a further task force within the ITS-AD group. So that's where we expect the current task force work to go forward to. and we expect that by next year or by mid of next year, we are having some concrete directions on the outputs of this task force and what needs to be taken further beyond that.
Well, thank you so much, Hari. Let's continue with our next speaker, Gilles Amt.
Okay, good morning, everyone, in this webinar. My focus in this webinar will be a very specific part of automotive security, and that is the communications with other participants in traffic. This is the nightmare, a vehicle being hacked, and we will dive into the impact it can have and also the measures that are being taken by industry. But I also shall give a short introduction about security for those who are not familiar with security, and I can imagine many of the participants in this webinar will not be actively participating and designing security programs. So what we will cover, vehicle security, which was already introduced by the two colleagues from RDW. I will dive into communication security, which we call V2X. We will focus on the main risks to get a better understanding of the main risks in future traffic on the roads. There's no need to talk about risks unless there is a perspective to address risk, which fortunately there is. So everyone, whether it's a government official, from a road operator perspective, or from an OEM perspective, or tier one supplier, everyone can take his responsibility in addressing risk, also in vehicle communications. So I will address that as well. And I will give you an update of the industry development for a trusted V2X communications network. There's a time limit of 20 minutes, so we will only address the highlights, of course. In the end, I will give you my email address for any future questions that may not be dealt with as part of this seminar. Hopefully, we will have enough time for questions. Where I will come from, short introduction. Also, Geert meant this in the very first introduction in this webinar. The Netherlands have a very active program on bringing smart mobility in its full potential to the roads. Automated driving is one aspect of it. Smart traffic lights is part of it. So the many aspects which we call smart mobility, we're putting it to the roads, and we have a knowledge infrastructure. The objective is to accelerate implementation and large-scale deployments. We have a central place for all the aspects of smart mobility, which involves all of the experts, not only from a local perspective in a country, the policy makers, the research institutions, but we also have a lineup to organize our governments within international working groups. The UNECE that Hari addressed in his introduction, that's one, but there is also reach out to international organizations in ISO, in ETSI, European Commission, and so on. The aspects are many. Security is one, but we also have privacy to address, legal aspects, the effects on the roads, human behavior, architecture from a technical point of view, so the many aspects that we address. Back to security. Everyone in this webinar is supposed to read the news and often one time sooner or later to read headings like is now on the screen. Security experts say that the hack of a car is very easy. If you look them up, it's just a wording that you can find in any web browser search engine on the internet. and you will be directed to YouTube introductions like the one on the right top corner of the screen. The work done by Charlie Miller and Chris Velasek. They have shown 2 years ago how they can get remote access, which is unauthorized, to a Jeep Cherokee. There was a lot of attention for this hack, but there are many other hacks that get equally attention like they had. People become to feel uncomfortable. There's a good reason for it. So we will address it in a more proper context. Just an introduction of the risks of remote connectivity of vehicles. Also in automated driving, there will be many connections of the vehicle to the outside world. What is a typically set of risks that will be imposed on connected vehicles? First of all, sometimes it may be forgotten, but everyone with a car that has keyless entry, it's a digital key in your pocket, there's a potential risk of theft. The idea is very simple. If the connectivity and the access to your vehicle is obtained remotely, and attackers could get access to your keys, and that's not physical access, but it can just be eavesdropping of your keys. That's enough to get access, and the claims are available on the internet. So if this is of your concern, of your interest, just have a look on the internet and you will find how you can access to BMW or many other OEMs vehicles. What Harry addressed, that was motor management manipulation. This is on the table of the UNECE. This is the risk, which is very severe risk, that unauthorized attackers can get access to the motor management system. That's a typical risk, but that's not all of the risk. There is also the risk of data loss. Everyone with a modern vehicle is aware that the vehicle in itself is collecting personal data. That is navigation data, your favorite destinations, that is your destinations of yesterday and the day before yesterday and also today. That's all locked in the vehicle, but also some other services are being locked that all have to do with remote connectivity. For example, your mobile phone data. If the vehicle is the platform that gives you remote connectivity, which is very easy for many drivers, this data is collected and potentially can get lost. At least it can be shared with the ones you don't expect and you don't want to share it with. And the risk of software updates, that was addressed by Harry. How can you be sure that software updates is a secure process? But the potential risk when it comes to remote connectivity is also the risk of unauthorized updates, and also the risk of potential malware being installed in the vehicle. So these are 4 different types of risks where the connectivity of the vehicle is the potential vulnerability that an potential attacker could be very interested in. From an application perspective, there's an easy concept. What is at risk? And this applies to every application, whether it's automotive or banking or whatever application. It explains best by banking application because everyone has concerns about his bank account. Of course, everyone may have an interest if there would be a way for having a higher bank account tomorrow than today. Everyone is interested, of course. So this has to do much about integrity of data, integrity of your bank account. There's also an interest in having some confidentiality. Many of us will not be willing to share the bank account details with many others. There's a concern about availability of data. That's also a concern for the bank itself, because your bank account, it's just a number in a database, not more. So if that number in the database would get lost tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, would be a big concern to the bank, of course. It may also be your own concern. It's probably you make some backups or digital prints of your bank accounts. So it all has to do with availability. And to get better control of these risks, one of the golden rules is just give access to bank accounts only to authorized sources. And if there is authorization in place, much attention will be given, and banks are very keen on this. They are very aware, of course, about the importance of proper authentication. Everyone can claim it's you or me or a bank employee. And then we come to the topic of identity management. Is this identity real, and how much proof will be given? So this is also the case in communications in the traffic system in the very near future. These are the same risks, which explains best by an analogy to your bank account. What is it about? In automated driving, there are two angles in automated driving. There's a promise of autonomous driving, Google cars, Tesla cars, and so on. They have developed this concept of autonomous driving to a large extent already within some traffic context, of course. But in the end, fully automated driving will not happen without any communications to other traffic participants that are a very valuable source of information. Typically, one can think of warning messages. The sooner a car will receive specific warnings within a specific context in its proximity, the better, because then it can be anticipated. Some examples, and there are many examples, of course. Some have been designed many years already go by the Car Consortium with many automotive manufacturers and tier ones in this consortium. But there are also interactive applications. For example, emergency vehicles on the roads. They are demanding for priority. Other vehicles should give way to an emergency vehicle. That's good for the traffic flow. It's good for traffic safety, of course. Typically, if this could become an automatic process, because drivers always feel uncertain when an emergency vehicle is approaching. And it's also very important to have a traffic light installation being part of this system, that it can give green light in time as soon as the emergency vehicle from a very specific direction is demanding for it. So this is the system of the future. And then we will drive into the specific risks of it. There was an initial risk analysis being done in the recent past already. And some of the risks, as an example, is what I want to show on the screen and want to share with it. The major of all risks in automated driving, it's not a communication risk. There's a framework in place that has adapted the standards from the industry, and it can be used more broadly than it was initially designed for. and it's mainly a source of trust within communications, that when communications networks are being established, that at least a proof of identity of the other party sending messages can be built up and being relied on. This will be equally applicable for commercial vehicles, for special purpose vehicles like emergency vehicles. It can be police cars, it can be taxis or public transit cars, and it will be also applicable to roadside units, which can be a traffic light or a speed limit or a road work warning message as the source. This is the end of this part of the introduction. Would like to give the floor back to Yvonne, and we are open for questions. I'm sitting next to Geert and Harry, so we are open to hear any questions from this audience. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Now have some questions. The first question we have is from Victorious Vitas. It's a question for Harry. Can we get an update about technical standard development? What are the timelines and the overall picture? Because they are developing technologies for secure and private in-vehicle data access for CITS, and it's difficult to navigate among the standardization bodies and common technical requirements in the EU and elsewhere. So how, Harry, can we help Victorious to keep track of the standard development?
Thank you for your question. The current work on the UNEC task force, it's publicly available for anyone to follow. I can send the links along with my presentation so that people can keep track of what the developments are happening. I could also give the links of the latest working papers that we are currently developing. But as I mentioned before, it's always a work in progress, and we expect to have better and more concrete versions in the coming months. We usually meet for this task force working group once in every 2 months. So we have our next meeting in January as well as in February, and we expect to have a concrete work product by the end of March 2018, which we would be submitting it back to a parent group, where a decision would be made on finalizing the requirements, whether we have to do it as a regulation, which is more mandatory, or whether we have to do it as a resolution in which we prescribe best practices for the industry. So these decisions are quite open, and we expect to have more clarity in that by June or July next year. And there is also a possibility that certain topics that are that have been identified within this task force group, for example, like software validation, we also set up another task force in order to deal with those requirements in more detail. Right now it's work in progress, but I think in the coming months there will be clarity in terms of like end of February, end of March we would have a clear idea on the deliverables of this task force, and by mid of next year we'd be having clarity on where we would want to go forward after that.
Okay.
I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. I would like to go to the next question from Suleiman Berber. In fact, there are 2 questions. Which role will play the so-called accredited conformity assessment bodies in the V2X communications autonomous driving? And which role will play the national accreditation bodies in Europe? So maybe that's
thank you
also for yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Gilles. Thank you for the question. Yeah, the 2 answers to this. the system for accreditation are being set up right now. So this is step-by-step approach. When it comes to V2X communications, at least for the CITS communications, based on the Wi-Fi technology, that is in the lead right now, because a PKI system was built to establish this reliable communications. It was not part of this introduction. Certificate policy, at least I showed the title page of it. So there it is mentioned, and that will mean that the European Commission will have a role in it, but not just the European Commission, also other stakeholders, automotive industry and member states will have a role in it. And also independent accredited auditors will have a role. This is being dealt with. Hopefully the total system will be published in the security policy document. This is currently a draft, and the plan of the European Commission is that it should be finalized next week already in the very next meeting that will take place in Brussels. So it's very current. The big picture is there, but the population of individual entities is taking place right now. Hopefully this is a first answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I then ask a question to our panelists? Very short, what kind of recommendations could you give to all those people who are now starting to be involved in the big pilot projects and the field operational tests on automated driving? How should they deal with security issues?
Geert trying to answer this question, which is of course a quite open question, because like we have told, there's a lot of regulation tryouts underway, but a total of regulation is not regulated yet. What you could say is that when you get into the in the area of vehicles on the road, connected and having more intelligence on board, like self-driving assistance and so on, that we from our governments look at this vehicle as being a highly secure data center. And we also try to approach setting up regulations and setting up help in designing it as close as possible, or let's say safe as possible. Secure as possible is maybe a better word, because safety was now always on our agenda, and security comes into play because it's starting to get connected. The direction is we try to move forward to have a highly secure data center on board if it goes to the self-driving functions and secure functions. The car builders, though, are moving from down, like Gilles talked about the keyless entry, like other systems. It's not really high secure, and it's all done on a responsibility of a car builder himself to build it safe. We as governments are looking at it in the highly secure way. So the direction we make is, like I said, get it as high as secure as possible, or show us that you have an architecture designed where in layers you can show how security on the internal side, like the motor management and the steering management and the self-driving functions, are so close that they're not enterable. And multimedia functions or a keyless entry, okay, this is more on the outer shelf of that 3-layer security. but it's exactly the same direction as you see in securing high secured data centers.
Much for this answer. We have 2 more questions before we conclude this webinar. Charles Lowe asked, are there any thoughts from the panelists? Oh, no, sorry, we have already 3 questions. We have to go quickly. First from Matteo Vittori, how to combine data sharing access with security? Do they have any recommendations about whether and how car manufacturers should give access to car data? Any ideas from our panelists?
Yeah, this is Gilles. A very general question. Most important is to have a proper design, which requires, I think, a full assessment of all the data from an inventory perspective, and also create subsets of data with access and authorization tables. And from a risk perspective, the means of access should be risk-based, because not all the data in the vehicle will be subject to the same risk. So when it comes to giving access, for example, the methods of authentication, whether it should be token-based, whether it should be access rule-based, and so on, that should be carefully designed, and ideally it should also be audited on a regular basis. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So I would recommend risk-based.
Okay, we have a few minutes left before this webinar will end. There is a question from Charles Lowe about thoughts on the cybersecurity of public transport vehicles. Do they differ from autonomous private cars? A question from Oliver Freck about V2V security requirements. Whether Gilles has any thoughts to share about V2I security and what levels this should be addressed. So maybe a very quick reaction from Gilles.
Yeah, for both questions, the first is about public transit. I'm not up to date for public transit vehicles as such, whether there's any program ongoing or whatever. From a communications perspective, yeah, they will be participants in the ecosystem of V2X communications. And then I will come to the V2V question. Public transit could participate in the system like any other vehicle. Most probably first transit would be V2I, vehicle to infrastructure. The V2V question specifically, so far, the V2V and the V2I design have not been that different. Many messages being broadcast by vehicles will be received either by other vehicles in the proximity of the vehicle or by roadside equipment, and it's up to the software of a vehicle, the roadside unit, whether they can deal with this piece of information that they have been received, and whether it's part of a larger communication protocol or whatever. So it will be very much use case based.
Okay, thank you very much. It's 12:10, so we will have to stop. First of all, I'd like to thank our 3 speakers for their very interesting presentations. I would like to thank the audience for being with us and for your questions. If you have more questions, just send them to us or directly to the speakers. I have to apologize for the problems we had with the connection. I don't know what happened. We tried it out before and there were no problems, but you never know with communications, as we became aware during these presentations. My introduction on the CAD support action was probably not, had problems with the audio. Just to summarize, CAD, who organizes these webinars, is a European support action in the field of road automation, and we try to build a network across Europe and beyond, exchanging information and developing knowledge about the issues and supporting the ongoing projects at a European and national level on road automation. The recording of this webinar and the slides will be put on the website, where you can find the address and where you can find more information both about CAD and ongoing activities. We have a Twitter account, and you can subscribe to our newsletter just by going to our website and to subscribe to our newsletters and newsflash. Your organization can also become an associated partner in the project, and you can find that information also on the website Connected Automated Driving as one word.eu. So thank you all very much, and please stay in touch with us. Let us know what other kinds of topics related to cybersecurity you want to hear about. So maybe we can organize a next webinar on this topic. And thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you.